She collapsed in the snow carrying 2 lives, and woke in the arms of something that had forgotten how to be alive. The blizzard had no mercy. It carved through the Carpathian passes like a blade through flesh, turning the world into a white void where direction meant nothing and survival was a coin toss between willpower and fate. The woman stumbled through it anyway, one hand pressed against her swollen belly, the other clutching a shawl that had long since frozen stiff against her skin. Her name was Elena Dragomir, 26 years old, pregnant, alone. She had been left behind, not accidentally, not tragically, deliberately. Her husband, if she could still call him that, had driven her 12 miles from their village and told her to get out of the car. The excuse had been flimsy, wrapped in the language of shame and family honor. The child isn't mine. My mother confirmed it. You've disgraced us. It didn't matter that the child was his. It didn't matter that she had never touched another man. It didn't matter that the village midwife had told him the baby had his father's nose in the ultrasound. What mattered was that his mistress was 8 weeks pregnant, and keeping 2 women was inconvenient. So he had left Elena on a mountain road in the middle of a January storm, knowing full well what that meant. She had walked for an hour before her legs began to fail. 2 hours before she couldn't feel her fingers. 3 hours before she realized she was going to die. The contractions started at hour 4. Elena collapsed against a stone outcropping, her breath coming in ragged clouds, her vision swimming. The baby was early, 6 weeks early. And somewhere in the chaos of cold and pain, she understood that neither of them would survive this. The irony was cruel. Her husband had wanted her dead, and the mountain would grant his wish. She closed her eyes. And then she felt hands, not wind, not imagination. Hands, strong, steady, impossibly warm despite the frost that coated everything. "Don't fight me," a voice said, low, calm, edged with something ancient. "I'm taking you home." Elena's eyes fluttered open. Through the white curtain of snow, she saw a face, male, sharp cheekbones, eyes like polished onyx. Dark hair that fell in heavy waves past his collar. He wore no coat, no gloves, nothing that made sense in a blizzard that could kill a man in minutes. "Who?" Silence. He lifted her as though she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest. His body radiated heat, unnatural, impossible heat, and Elena felt her frozen limbs begin to thaw in his arms. "You're bleeding. The child is in distress. If you want either of you to live, stop talking and let me carry you." She should have been terrified. She should have screamed. But the alternative was dying in the snow, and this stranger, whoever, whatever he was the only mercy the mountain had offered. So Elena closed her eyes again and let the darkness take her. She woke to firelight. The scent of burning cedar, the softness of furs beneath her body, the warmth of blankets piled so high she could barely move. Elena's hand flew to her belly, still swollen, still moving. The baby kicked once, as if to confirm its survival. "You're in labor," the voice said. "Early labor. It will progress quickly now that you're warm." She turned her head. He sat in a chair by the fire, watching her with the stillness of a predator that didn't need to move to be dangerous. The light carved shadows across his face, turning him into something out of a medieval painting. Beautiful and severe, and utterly inhuman. "Where am I?" Elena whispered. "My home. Where is that?" "Far enough from the village that no one will find you." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, fingers steepled. "I heard you walking, heard your heartbeat slowing, heard the child's distress, so I brought you here." Elena's breath hitched. "You heard my heartbeat?" His eyes glinted. "I hear everything in these mountains." Silence. Then, "What are you?" He smiled, a slow, humorless curve of his mouth. "The question isn't what. The question is whether you want to live badly enough to accept help from something you've been taught to fear." Elena stared at him, at the firelight reflecting in his black eyes, at the way his chest didn't rise and fall with breath, at the faint sharpness of his canines when he spoke. And she understood. "You're a vampire. Yes. And you saved me. For now." Another contraction rolled through her, stealing her breath. She gasped, curling forward, and the vampire was at her side in a heartbeat, moving faster than physics allowed. "Breathe," he commanded. "Slow. Steady. The child is coming whether you're ready or not." "I can't." Elena's voice broke. "I can't do this alone." The vampire's hand settled on her shoulder, firm, grounding. "You're not alone." And for the first time in months, Elena believed someone. Subscribe if you believe even the cursed can cradle life in their hands. The contractions came in waves. Elena gripped the edge of the bed, her knuckles white, her breath ragged. The vampire, she still didn't know his name, had stripped off his coat and rolled up his sleeves like a battlefield surgeon preparing for war. His movements were precise, methodical, utterly calm. "How long?" she gasped between pains. "Hours, maybe less." He was boiling water in a copper kettle, laying out clean cloth, moving with the efficiency of someone who had done this before. "Your body is strong. The child is small, but viable. You'll both survive if you don't panic." "Don't panic," Elena repeated bitterly. "I'm in labor 6 weeks early in a vampire's house in the middle of a blizzard." Accurate summary. Despite the pain, she almost laughed. He glanced at her, a flicker of something unreadable in those black eyes. "What's the child's name?" I don't know yet." "You haven't chosen." Elena shook her head. "My husband said it was bad luck to name a baby before it was born. He said—" Her voice cracked. "He said a lot of things that turned out to be lies." The vampire's jaw tightened. He said nothing, but the silence was heavier than words. Another contraction. Elena screamed. "Breathe through it," he said sharply. "Don't hold your breath. Let it pass. It hurts. I know. How could you possibly know?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time she saw something human flicker behind the monster. "Because I've held dying men in my arms and listened to them beg for mercy. Pain is pain, mortal or not, and I've seen enough of it to recognize when someone is trying to survive." Elena's eyes filled with tears, not from the contraction, from the truth in his words. "What's your name?" she whispered. He hesitated. Then, "Lucian." "Lucian," she repeated. "Thank you for not leaving me in the snow." His expression darkened. "The man who left you there deserves to die screaming." "Maybe." Elena's hand moved to her belly. "But if he hadn't, I wouldn't be here, and neither would this baby." Lucian said nothing, but the look in his eyes was something ancient and burning. The labor lasted 6 hours, 6 hours of pain and blood and primal fear. 6 hours of Lucian's calm voice guiding her through each breath, each push, each moment when she thought she couldn't continue. "I can't," Elena sobbed at hour 5. "I can't do this." "You can." Lucian's hand gripped hers, strong enough to anchor her, gentle enough not to break her. "You've survived a husband's betrayal, a blizzard, a vampire's mercy. You'll survive this too." "Why do you care?" she gasped. "Why does a vampire care if a human lives or dies?" Lucian's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw the weight of centuries in them. "Because I've spent 300 years taking life," he said quietly, "and I'd like to remember what it feels like to save one." Elena's heart cracked open, and then the baby came. A girl, small, red, screaming with the fury of someone who had fought for her right to exist. Lucian caught her with hands that had once torn throats and now cradled fragile life. He cleaned her with the tenderness of a father, wrapped her in soft cloth, and placed her in Elena's arms. "She's perfect," Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face. Lucian stepped back. His expression was unreadable, but his hands trembled. "What will you name her?" he asked. Elena looked down at the tiny face, at the dark eyes that hadn't yet learned to focus, at the fingers that curled instinctively around her thumb. "Aurora," she said. "It means dawn." Lucian's breath caught, a sound so faint Elena almost missed it. "Why that name?" Elena looked up at him, at the vampire who had saved her, at the creature of darkness who had delivered her into light. "Because she was born in the darkest hour," Elena said softly, "and survived." Lucian turned away, but not before Elena saw the grief in his eyes. The blizzard lasted 3 days, 3 days of white silence beyond the stone walls, 3 days of Elena recovering in Lucian's bed while the vampire kept watch by the fire. 3 days of Aurora sleeping in a cradle he had carved from ancient wood with hands that remembered mortality. Elena watched him. She shouldn't have felt safe. Every instinct screamed that she was alone with a predator. But Lucian moved through the house with the quiet reverence of someone tending a sacred space. He fed the fire, brought her water, changed Aurora's wrappings with surprising gentleness, and he never touched Elena without permission. "You're staring," Lucian said without looking up from the fire. Elena flushed. "I'm trying to understand you." "Don't." His voice was flat. "There's nothing to understand. You saved us. I found you dying. That's not the same thing. You could have left us. I could have." Lucian turned to face her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "But I've lived 3 centuries in these mountains, and I've learned that some things, once found, cannot be abandoned without consequence." Elena pulled Aurora closer. "What kind of consequence?" Lucian's smile was bitter, the kind that haunts you longer than death. Silence. Then Aurora stirred, making a small sound, not quite a cry, more like a question. Elena began to hum, a lullaby her grandmother had taught her. The melody was old, older than memory. Lucian froze. "That song?" he said hoarsely. "Where did you learn it?" "My grandmother." "Why?" "My mother used to sing it." His voice was barely audible. 300 years ago, before I became this." Elena's heart clenched. "You remember her?" "I remember everything." Lucian's hands curled into fists. "Every face, every voice, every person I loved and lost. Immortality doesn't erase memory, it sharpens it, makes it a blade that cuts deeper the longer you live." Elena wanted to reach for him, but something in his posture, the rigid stillness of a man holding himself together by force of will, made her hesitate. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. "Becoming what you are?" Lucian was silent for a long moment. Then, "Every day." "Then why not?" "End it," he laughed, a sound like broken glass. "Because I'm a coward. Because I've watched empires rise and fall, and I still can't bring myself to step into the sun. Because some part of me still believes there's a reason I'm here, even if I don't know what it is." Aurora made another small sound. Lucian's eyes softened. "She's beautiful," he said. "Fragile, mortal, everything I'm not." Elena looked down at her daughter, then back at Lucian. "You saved her," she said. "That makes you part of her story, whether you're mortal or not." Lucian's expression cracked, just for a moment, just long enough for Elena to see the man beneath the monster. "When the storm ends," he said quietly, "you'll leave, both of you, and you'll forget this ever happened. I won't. You will." His voice turned hard, "because that's what mortals do. They survive, they move forward, they forget." Elena shook her head. "Not this time. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these immortal confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you." On the 4th morning, the blizzard broke. Sunlight poured through the windows, pale, cold, relentless. Lucian stood at the threshold, staring at the light as though it were an enemy. He didn't cross into it, didn't even test the boundary. Elena watched from the bed, Aurora asleep in her arms. "Does it hurt?" she asked. "The sunlight?" "Yes." "How much?" Lucian's jaw tightened. "Imagine every nerve in your body catching fire. Imagine your skin blistering and peeling while you're still conscious. Imagine burning from the inside out and knowing you won't die quickly enough to escape the pain." Elena's breath caught. "That's terrible." "That's justice." Lucian turned away from the window. "For what I am, for what I've done. You saved me. Once." His voice was hollow. "That doesn't erase 3 centuries of feeding." Elena hesitated. Then, "Do you kill them? The people you feed from?" Lucian was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "Not anymore." "But you did." "Yes." "Why did you stop?" Lucian looked at her, really looked at her, and Elena saw something raw in his eyes. "Because I started remembering their names, their faces, the way they begged, and I realized I'd become the thing I swore I'd never be." "What thing?" "A monster without conscience." Elena shifted Aurora in her arms. "If you were without conscience, you wouldn't have saved us." "Maybe." Lucian moved to the fire, his back to her. "Or maybe I'm just selfish. Maybe I saved you because I wanted to remember what it felt like to be human, to matter, to do something that wasn't steeped in death." "That's not selfish," Elena said softly. "That's redemption." Lucian laughed bitterly. "Redemption requires forgiveness, and there's no one left alive to forgive me." Elena stood, careful not to wake Aurora. She crossed the room, slowly, deliberately, until she stood beside him. "I forgive you," she said. Lucian flinched as though she'd struck him. "You don't know what I've done." "You're right, I don't." Elena's voice was steady. "But I know what you did for me, and for Aurora, and that matters more than whatever you were before." Lucian's hands trembled. "Don't." "Don't what?" "Don't make me hope." His voice cracked. "Hope is the cruelest thing you can give someone who's already damned." Elena reached out, slowly, giving him time to pull away, and touched his hand. Lucian froze. His skin was cold, marble hard, inhuman. But beneath it, Elena felt something pulse, faint, distant, like an echo of a heartbeat that refused to die. "You're not damned," she whispered. "Not anymore." Lucian closed his eyes, and for the first time in 300 years, he allowed himself to believe her. The days blurred together. Elena recovered. Aurora grew stronger, and Lucian, ancient, solitary Lucian, found himself doing something he hadn't done in centuries. Living, not surviving, not hunting, not enduring the endless march of time. Living. He taught Elena how to navigate the mountains, how to read the weather, how to find water beneath frozen streams, how to set snares and build fires that wouldn't give away her position. "Why are you teaching me this?" Elena asked one afternoon as they stood in the snow outside his house, Aurora bundled against her chest. "Because you'll need it when you leave." Elena's expression tightened. "What if I don't want to leave?" Lucian turned away. "You will." "You don't know that." "I've lived 300 years, Elena. I know how this ends." His voice was hard, defensive. "You'll stay until the weather clears, until you're strong enough to travel. And then you'll take Aurora and find a village that will take you in. You'll rebuild your life, and eventually, you'll forget I ever existed." "I won't forget. You will." Lucian faced her, his eyes burning. "Because forgetting is how mortals survive grief, and staying here with me would be grief, slow, inevitable, suffocating. Elena stepped closer. Why? Because I'm immortal and you're not. Lucian's voice was raw. Because I'll watch you age and wither and die. Because Aurora will grow up knowing her mother loved a monster. Because there's no future here. Only waiting. Then make a future. Lucian laughed, a bitter, broken sound. How? By turning you? By condemning you to the same hell I've lived for 3 centuries? No, I won't do that. Not even for you. Elena's eyes filled with tears. Then what do you want? Lucian's mask cracked. I want you to live. I want Aurora to grow up safe. I want you to find a man who can give you sunlight and warmth and everything I can't. I want... His voice broke. I want you to be happy, even if it destroys me. Silence. Aurora stirred, making a small sound. Elena rocked her gently, her gaze never leaving Lucian's face. What if happiness looks different than you think? She whispered. Lucian closed his eyes. Don't. What if it's not about sunlight and warmth? What if it's about someone who sees you, all of you, and chooses to stay anyway? Elena. What if I don't want to forget? Lucian's hands clenched into fists. You don't know what you're asking. Yes, I do. Elena's voice was steady, strong. I'm asking you to let me choose. Not my husband, not fate, not fear. Me. Lucian opened his eyes, and in them, Elena saw 3 centuries of loneliness finally crack open. I don't know how, he admitted. I don't know how to let someone stay. Elena smiled, sad and soft and heartbreakingly real. Then we'll learn together. Spring came slowly to the mountains. The snow melted. Green returned to the valleys, and Elena stayed. Not because she had to. Not because she had nowhere else to go. Because she chose to. Lucian didn't ask her to stay, didn't plead or bargain or make promises he couldn't keep. He simply allowed it. Built a second room for Aurora, carved toys from wood, watched from the doorway as Elena sang lullabies in the firelight, and slowly, so slowly he almost didn't notice, he began to remember what it felt like to belong to something other than darkness. Aurora grew. 6 months, 8 months, a year. She learned to crawl on stone floors warmed by Lucian's careful fires. Learned to laugh at the way he could move faster than sight. Learned to reach for him with chubby hands that didn't know fear. She's not afraid of you, Elena said one evening, watching Lucian hold Aurora while she slept. She should be. Why? Lucian looked down at the child in his arms. So small, so fragile, so impossibly mortal. Because I'm dangerous. To her? To everyone. His voice was quiet. I'm a predator, Elena. That doesn't change just because I've learned to control it. Elena moved closer. Do you want to hurt her? No. Do you want to hurt me? Never. Then you're not dangerous. Elena's hand settled over his. You're just afraid. Lucian's throat tightened. Of what? Of loving us, of losing us, of letting yourself believe you deserve this. Silence. Aurora stirred in her sleep, her tiny hand curling around Lucian's finger. He stared at it, at the trust in that small gesture, and felt something inside him shatter. I don't, he whispered, deserve this. Maybe not. Elena's voice was soft. But you have it anyway, and that's grace, Lucian, whether you believe in it or not. Lucian closed his eyes, and for the first time in 300 years, he let himself cry. Months turned to years. Aurora grew into a wild, fearless child who climbed trees and chased foxes and demanded bedtime stories about knights and dragons. She called Lucian Papa, without hesitation, without question, without understanding that the man who taught her to read and held her when she had nightmares was something the world called monster. Elena bloomed, not despite the isolation, but because of it. She painted, wrote, taught Aurora, built a garden that somehow thrived in the thin mountain soil. And Lucian, ancient, damned Lucian learned what it meant to be human again. Not mortal, not alive in the way Elena and Aurora were, but human. He learned how to laugh at Aurora's jokes, how to hold Elena in the dark and feel her heartbeat against his chest, how to tend a garden and mend clothes and read stories with voices for every character. He learned how to live. One night, Elena found him standing at the window, staring at the stars. "What are you thinking?" she asked. Lucian was quiet for a long moment. Then, "That I've been alive for 300 years, and I only started living when you collapsed in the snow." Elena moved beside him, her hand finding his. "Do you regret saving me?" "Never." "Do you regret letting me stay?" Lucian turned to face her. His eyes, black and ancient and impossibly tender, held hers. "I regret nothing," he said, "except that I can't grow old with you." Elena's breath caught. "Then turn me." "No. Lucian, I won't curse you." His voice was firm, final. "I won't take your mortality, your warmth, your light. I won't make you into what I am." "Then what happens when I die?" Lucian's expression cracked. "I endure." "That's not living." "I know." He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. "But it's the only mercy I can give you. A full life, a human life, without the weight of eternity." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want a life without you. And I don't want an eternity knowing I stole your mortality." Lucian's voice broke. "So we'll have this, these years, these moments, and when you're gone, I'll carry them. Forever." Elena kissed him then, fierce and desperate and full of all the words she couldn't say. And Lucian kissed her back, knowing it would never be enough. 20 years passed like water through fingers. Elena's transformation was gradual, almost imperceptible at first. A silver strand here, a fine line there. But Lucian noticed. He noticed everything. The way her breath came slightly shorter after climbing the hill to their garden. The way her hands, once smooth and quick, developed calluses and then age spots. The way she moved in the mornings, slower, more carefully, as though testing the reliability of joints that had begun to protest their use. Lucian remained unchanged. Marble skin, obsidian eyes, hair that fell in the same dark waves it had for 3 centuries. He was a monument to the moment of his death, frozen forever at 32, while Elena bloomed and then began her gentle fade toward winter. The contrast was subtle at first, then undeniable, then heartbreaking. Aurora grew into a force of nature. At 20, she was her mother's daughter in every way that mattered, fierce, compassionate, uncompromising in her love. She knew what Lucian was, had always known. The village children used to whisper about the vampire in the mountains, but Aurora would simply shrug and say, "That's my father, and he's kinder than most men with beating hearts." She met Thomas during a summer festival in the valley below. He was a carpenter, broad-shouldered and patient, with hands that knew how to build things that lasted. When he came to ask for Aurora's hand, he climbed the mountain with a hand-carved box he'd made himself. Lucian met him at the door. "I want to marry your daughter," Thomas said without preamble. "I know what you are. I know the stories. But I also know she loves you, and I want to do this properly." Lucian studied him for a long moment. "Do you fear me?" "Yes." "Good. That means you're not stupid." Lucian stepped aside. "She's in the garden. And Thomas? If you ever hurt her, being afraid won't save you." Thomas swallowed hard. Understood. Aurora married him 3 months later in a ceremony on the mountain. Elena wept. Lucian stood perfectly still, his hand on Elena's shoulder, watching his daughter, though biology said otherwise, pledge her life to a man who would age alongside her, the way he couldn't with Elena. They built a house on the forest's edge, close enough that Aurora could visit every week. Within 2 years, she brought her first child to meet them, a boy with Thomas's eyes and Aurora's wild spirit. "His name is Victor," Aurora said, placing the baby in Lucian's arms. "After your real name." Lucian froze. He hadn't used his birth name in 300 years, hadn't spoken it aloud since the night he'd been turned. "How did you—" "Mom told me." Aurora's smile was gentle. "She said you deserved to hear it again, to remember who you were before." The baby yawned and gripped Lucian's finger with the unconscious trust of innocence. Something inside Lucian's chest, something he'd thought long dead, twisted painfully. "Thank you," he whispered. More children came, then grandchildren. The house filled with laughter and chaos and the particular kind of noise that comes from life renewing itself. And through it all, Lucian and Elena watched from their mountain, their sanctuary, their small eternity carved from impossible circumstances. But time, patient and relentless, continued its work. Elena turned 40, then 50. Her hair went fully silver, a crown she wore with the same grace she'd brought to everything. Her face mapped her life in lines, laugh lines around her eyes, worry lines on her forehead, the soft grooves that came from decades of smiling. Lucian thought she'd never been more beautiful. At 60, she began to slow in ways that frightened him. Her breath came shorter, her energy ebbed faster. Some mornings she woke with pain in her joints that no amount of warmth could ease. "I'm dying," she said matter-of-factly one autumn evening as they sat by the fire. Aurora's youngest grandchild had visited that afternoon, filling the house with squeals and questions. Now the silence felt heavier than usual. "Don't." Lucian's voice was rough. "Don't say that. It's the truth." Elena reached for his hand. Her skin was papery now, marked with veins that stood out like rivers on a map. "I can feel it. The way my heart works harder. The way sleep pulls at me more insistently. My body is preparing to let go. I won't let it. You can't stop it." Her smile was sad and soft and infinitely kind. "You could turn me. I know that. But we both know you won't." Lucian's jaw clenched. They'd had this conversation before, many times, and every time he'd refused. "I won't curse you. I won't take away your humanity, your warmth, your ability to walk in sunlight and feel the rain without pain. I won't make you into what I am. Even if it means losing me, especially then." His voice broke. "Because losing you after a full human life, after you've lived and loved and grown old naturally, that's bearable, barely. But watching you realize what immortality actually costs, watching you hate what you've become, that would destroy us both." Elena studied his face. "You've thought about this a lot. Every day for 20 years. And your answer is still no?" "Yes." She nodded slowly. "Then I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you won't follow." Elena's grip on his hand tightened. "Promise me you won't walk into the sun or starve yourself or do any of the things I know you're already considering. Promise me you'll keep living. For Aurora. For Victor and the others. For all the people who need someone to remember that monsters can choose mercy." Lucian closed his eyes. "Elena, promise me, Lucian." Her voice held the same steel that had kept her alive through that blizzard, through childbirth, through 20 years of building a life in impossible circumstances. "Promise me that my love won't be the thing that ends you." Silence stretched between them. Outside, an owl called. Inside, the fire crackled, and between them, 20 years of love and choice and deliberate defiance of fate hung in the balance. "I promise," Lucian finally said. "I promise I'll keep living. But Elena, I don't know if I can call it life without you." "You will." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Because you're stronger than you think. And because you've already survived 300 years of darkness. A few more won't break you. They might. Then let them try. Elena smiled against his neck. You're Victor Draculest. You survived becoming a monster. You survived centuries alone. You survived finding love when you thought you were beyond redemption. You'll survive this too. He held her as the fire burned low, memorizing the weight of her against him, the rhythm of her breathing, the scent of lavender in her hair that age hadn't dimmed. 3 weeks later, on a clear November night with stars so bright they looked close enough to touch, Elena Dragomir closed her eyes for the last time. Aurora was reading poetry by candlelight. Lucian held Elena's hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm the way he had for 20 years. And between one breath and the next, her heart simply stopped. The silence was catastrophic. Lucian felt the moment her life ended like a physical blow. The warmth that had radiated from her for 2 decades went still. The heartbeat that had anchored him to humanity fell silent, and the woman who had taught him how to live, truly live, was gone. He didn't scream, didn't rage, didn't move. He simply sat there holding her hand while Aurora wept and the candles burned down and the world continued spinning without pause or ceremony. "Papa," Aurora finally whispered, We need to prepare her." Lucian nodded mechanically, but his hand didn't release Elena's. "Papa, I know." His voice was hollow. "I know. Give me a moment." Aurora left him alone with her mother's body, and in the privacy of that grief, Lucian finally let himself break. He laid his head on Elena's chest where her heart should have been beating. And for the first time in 300 years, Victor Draculest, the vampire who had survived wars and plagues and the endless weight of immortality, wept like the mortal man he'd once been. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered to her still form. "You were supposed to teach me. You were supposed to be here. How do I exist in a world where you're not breathing?" The silence offered no answers, only the terrible, infinite absence of the woman who had been his redemption. Lucian carried Elena's body to the highest peak at dawn. He'd wrapped her in white linen, her hands folded over her chest, her silver hair arranged carefully around her face. She looked peaceful, smaller somehow, as though death had reduced her to the essential truth of what she'd been. A woman who had chosen courage over fear, love over safety, hope over despair. Aurora walked beside him, one hand on his arm, the other clutching a worn book of poetry. Behind them came Thomas, his shoulders bowed with grief. The grandchildren followed in solemn procession. Victor, now 17, carrying a shovel. Helena, 14, holding wildflowers, the younger ones clinging to their parents' hands. Behind them came the villagers, dozens of them. People Elena had healed when they were sick, taught when they were young, comforted when they grieved. People who had learned to trust the strange family on the mountain. People who understood that the vampire walking ahead of them was more than the sum of his nature. They reached the peak as the sun began to rise. Lucian stood at the edge of the circle, where shadow met light, his body rigid with the effort of staying upright. The sun's first rays warmed the air, brought color back to the world, illuminated the grave that Thomas and Victor had dug during the night. It was beautiful, terrible, perfect. "She loved mornings," Aurora said softly, her voice carrying in the thin mountain air. She used to wake before dawn just to watch the sun rise. She said it reminded her that darkness always ends, that light always returns. Lucian's hands clenched. He couldn't step into the sunlight, couldn't stand at the grave's edge where the rays fell golden and warm, but he could watch from the shadows as they lowered Elena's body into the earth. Aurora spoke first. "My mother," she began, her voice breaking, "was the strongest person I've ever known. Not because she never fell. She did, more times than I can count, but because she always got back up. She was abandoned by a man who should have cherished her. left to die in a blizzard, forced to give birth alone in a vampire's house. And instead of breaking, instead of giving up, she chose to build something beautiful from the ruins. She wiped her eyes. She taught me that family isn't blood. It's choice. It's showing up. It's loving someone so fiercely that you change the very definition of what's possible. And she loved my father. Aurora looked at Lucian, her eyes fierce. Loved him so completely that she taught a vampire how to be human again. Thomas spoke next, his voice rough. Elena welcomed me when many wouldn't have. She saw past my rough hands and simple trade and judged me only by how I treated her daughter. She was the first person outside my own family to call me son. And I. He swallowed hard. I will miss her every day. One by one, the villagers stepped forward. An old woman. She delivered my grandson when the midwife couldn't reach us in the storm. A young man. She taught me to read when everyone else said I was too slow to learn. A middle-aged couple. She sat with us when our daughter died, held our hands, didn't try to fix it, just bore witness to our pain. The stories piled up like flowers on a grave, each one a testament to the life Elena had lived, the people she'd touched, the light she'd brought to a mountain that had once known only a vampire's darkness. Finally, Victor, Elena's first grandchild, named for the man he didn't know was standing in shadow, stepped forward. Grandmother, he said, his young voice steady despite the tears on his face. You told me once that monsters are just people who forgot how to love. You said the scariest thing in the world isn't darkness. It's choosing to stay in it when light is offered. You said, his voice broke. You said grandfather taught you that he chose light even when it burned him. And I never understood what you meant until right now. He turned to look at Lucian, hidden in shadow, his face a mask of controlled agony. Grandfather, Victor said clearly, I understand now. You loved her so much you let her stay mortal. You loved her so much you promised to keep living even though it will hurt every single day. You loved her so much you're standing in shadow right now so she could be buried in sunlight. That's not monstrous. That's the most human thing I've ever seen. Lucian's composure cracked. His hand went to his mouth, stifling the sound that wanted to escape. Aurora moved to his side. Papa, do you want to say something? He shook his head, then nodded, then closed his eyes. Finally, he spoke. Elena Dragomir, Lucian's voice was rough, scraped raw by grief, found me on the worst night of her life. I was a monster playing at hermit, convinced I was beyond redemption, existing but not living. And she... He stopped, breathed, continued. She looked at me with eyes that should have been filled with fear and instead saw something worth saving. He opened his eyes, staring at her linen-wrapped form. She gave me 20 years. 20 years of mornings I couldn't share but listen to her describe. 20 years of watching her move through sunlight while I stayed in shadow. 20 years of being loved despite every reason she shouldn't have. And it wasn't enough. 1,000 years wouldn't have been enough. But she was mortal, and mortality is a gift I refused to steal from her, no matter how much I wanted to. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. I have existed for 300 years, but I only lived for 20, and every moment of that life was because she chose to stay. Because she believed a vampire could learn to be human. Because she had the audacity to love something that shouldn't have been capable of loving back. Lucian looked up at the gathering, his eyes dry but devastated. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to wake up every night and remember she's not here. But I made her a promise. I promised I would keep living, keep protecting, keep choosing light even when it burns. So that's what I'll do. Not because I want to, not because I believe I'll ever be whole again, but because Elena asked, and I never could deny her anything. He stepped back into deeper shadow. Bury her in the light, let her rest where the sun can warm her. Let her sleep where morning comes first, and let her know, His voice finally broke completely. "Let her know that I will carry her with me, every night, every century, every moment until this curse finally ends and I can tell her myself that she was right, that love is stronger than death, that mercy can resurrect even the damned." Silence. Then, slowly, they began to lower Elena into the earth. Lucian watched from shadow as dirt covered white linen, watched as his family and his adopted village said goodbye to the woman who had given him everything, watched as the sun climbed higher, claiming the peak in light he could never touch. When it was done, when the last shovelful of earth had been placed and the last flower had been laid, Aurora came to him. "Come home, Papa," she said softly. "Please." Lucian looked at the grave, at the place where sunlight and earth held the woman he loved, at the ending he had known was coming, but had never been prepared for. "In a moment," he said. I need a moment." Aurora kissed his cheek. Then she left him alone. Lucian stood at the edge of shadow and light, as close as he could get to Elena's resting place without burning. And in the privacy of his grief, he spoke to her one last time. "You were right about everything, about love, about choice, about me being more than my nature, and I will keep my promise. I will live. I will protect our family. I will be the man you believed I could be." "But Elena?" His voice cracked. "It's going to hurt, every night, every moment, every time I breathe and you don't. And I need you to know that I would do it all again, every moment, every choice, every second of pain, because 20 years of loving you was worth an eternity of grief." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of earth and flowers and morning. And somewhere in the space between shadow and light, Lucian felt her presence, not as a ghost, not as memory, as something more fundamental, a promise kept. A love that death couldn't diminish. He stood there until the sun was fully risen and he had to retreat deeper into shadow to avoid burning. But he came back every night for the next 200 years, always at midnight, always alone, always to tell her about the people he'd saved, the promises he'd kept, the way her love continued to guide him long after her heart had stopped beating. The world changed. Empires that had been ancient when Lucian was human crumbled to dust. New nations rose from their ruins. Technology transformed everything. Horses gave way to trains, then cars, then machines that flew through the air. The village in the valley grew into a town, then a small city. Electricity replaced candles, computers replaced ledgers, and through it all, Lucian remained. He adapted because he had to, learned to navigate the modern world while maintaining his isolation. The mountain that had once been remote became accessible by road, but he'd chosen his location well, far enough from civilization that casual hikers didn't wander past, close enough that he could reach the town when needed. Aurora's descendants still lived in the valley. They kept his secret, honored his memory. Each generation learned the truth, that the guardian in the mountains was their ancestor, the vampire who had saved Elena and raised Aurora and protected their family for centuries. They brought him news, pictures, stories of births and deaths and marriages. They introduced their children on carefully planned visits, teaching them to respect but not fear the pale man who never aged. And Lucian kept his promise. He lived, deliberately, purposefully, painfully. He protected the area from things that went bump in the night, rouge vampires who didn't share his ethics, werewolves during full moons, the occasional demon that slipped through the veil. He delivered babies when doctors couldn't reach remote farms in time. He found lost hikers. He left anonymous donations at the hospital Elena had once dreamed of building. He was the shadow that kept the darkness at bay. But he was alone. Centuries alone. And the weight of it pressed down like stone. On a February night, 200 years after Elena's death, Lucian walked the mountain trails out of habit more than purpose. The world had just entered a new century. the 21st by human reckoning. Technology he barely understood connected people across continents. The night sky glowed with light pollution from the city below. Everything had changed, except him. He was climbing toward Elena's grave, his nightly pilgrimage, when he heard it. Crying, a child's crying. The sound hit him like a physical blow. For a moment he was frozen, caught in memory so vivid it hurt. Elena in the snow, Aurora in his arms. The countless moments when helpless voices had called out and he'd answered. Lucian ran. He found her collapsed against a pine tree, half buried in fresh snow. A girl, maybe 6 years old. She wore inadequate clothing, a thin jacket, sneakers instead of boots, no hat or gloves. Hypothermia had already set in. Her lips were blue, her breathing shallow. Her small body shivered violently. No, Lucian breathed. No, not again. He knelt beside her, his hands, always cold, always marble, somehow feeling the absence of her warmth even more acutely. Her eyes fluttered open, brown eyes, confused, terrified. Are you? Her voice was barely a whisper. Are you an angel? The question shattered something in Lucian's chest. 200 years ago, Aurora had asked him the same thing, the cycle continuing, the pattern repeating. No, little one, I'm something else entirely. He gathered her carefully into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. But I'm going to help you, I promise. Are you going to hurt me? Never. The word came out fierce, final. I'm going to take you somewhere warm, somewhere safe, and I'm going to make sure you survive this. Do you understand? She nodded weakly, then her eyes drifted closed. No, Lucian said sharply. Stay awake. Tell me your name. Mamara, Mara, beautiful name. I'm Lucian, and you're going to be fine, but you have to stay awake. Talk to me. Tell me how you got lost. He ran as he spoke, faster than human speed, but carefully, keeping her stable, his body heat, artificially generated through supernatural means, radiating to warm her freezing limbs. Car. Accident, Mara managed. Mom and Dad. They told me to find help, but I got lost. Lucian's jaw clenched. Where's the accident? Don't know. I walked. Walked for so long. You're very brave, Mara. Very strong. Just a little longer. He reached his house, the same stone structure he'd built 3 centuries ago, modernized now with electricity and plumbing, but still fundamentally his sanctuary, and kicked the door open. The next hours were a blur of controlled urgency. He stripped off her wet clothes, wrapped her in heated blankets, started an IV to combat dehydration. His medical knowledge was extensive, accumulated over centuries of necessity. He'd saved countless lives this way. But each one still mattered. Each one still carried weight. Mara's core temperature had dropped to dangerous levels. Lucian worked with the focus of someone who'd lost too much to lose again. He monitored her vitals, adjusted the heating, made sure her rewarming was gradual enough to avoid shock. At some point, he called the emergency services, reporting the girl he'd found and giving them enough information to locate her parents' accident without revealing too much about himself. They're alive, the dispatcher told him. Injured, but alive. Search and rescue is en route. We'll send someone for the girl. No, Lucian interrupted. She's severely hypothermic. Moving her now could be fatal. Send a medical team here. I'll keep her stable until they arrive. He gave them coordinates and disconnected before they could ask too many questions. Mara woke as dawn approached. Her eyes opened slowly, taking in the stone walls, the fireplace, the strange pale man sitting beside her bed with the stillness of a statue. You're real, she whispered. I thought maybe I dreamed you. I'm real. Lucian's expression softened. How do you feel? Warm, tired. She looked around. Where am I? My home. You were lost in the snow, hypothermic. I brought you here to help. My parents. Safe. The rescue team found them. They're at a hospital being treated for minor injuries. They've been looking for you all night. Mara's eyes filled with tears. I thought they were dead. No. Lucien's voice was gentle. They're fine. And you will be too. The medical team is coming to take you to them. Will you come? No, Lucien hesitated. I don't do well in hospitals. Too many people. Too many questions. Mara studied him with the unnerving perception of children. You're different, aren't you? Not like other people. Yes. Are you a monster? The question, so direct, so innocent, made Lucien's breath catch. Some would say so. But you saved me. Yes. Then you're not a monster. Mara said it with the absolute certainty of childhood logic. Monsters hurt people. You helped me. Lucien closed his eyes. It's more complicated than that. Why? Because. He opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. Because I am dangerous. Because I'm something that shouldn't exist. Because for a very long time, I was everything people are taught to fear. But not anymore? Not for a long time. What changed? Lucien was quiet for a moment. Then, someone taught me that what you are matters less than what you choose. That mercy is stronger than nature. That even monsters can learn to be more than their worst instincts. Who taught you that? A woman, a very long time ago. Was she nice? She was. Lucien's voice caught. She was everything, kind, strong, brave. She saw me at my worst and chose to believe I could be better. Did you love her? Yes. What happened? She died. 200 years ago. Mara's eyes widened. 200 years? How old are you? Very old. Are you going to die soon? No. Lucien struggled to explain immortality to a 6-year-old. I don't age like humans do. I'll probably exist for a very long time. That sounds lonely. The simple observation hit harder than any philosophical treatise ever had. It is, Lucien admitted. Very lonely. Is that why you saved me? Because you're lonely? No. Lucien shook his head. I saved you because someone needed help. Because I made a promise to keep protecting people. Because. He stopped, started again. Because the woman I loved made me promise I wouldn't give up. That I'd keep living. Keep choosing to be good, even when it hurt. Mara reached out and took his hand. Her small fingers were warm now, her grip surprisingly strong. I'm glad you kept your promise, she said seriously. Because if you hadn't, I would have died in the snow. Lucien stared at their joined hands, hers small and mortal and impossibly precious. His pale and cold and marked by centuries. And he understood. This was why Elena had made him promise. This was why he'd endured 200 years of grief and loneliness. This was why he existed when every rational part of him said he shouldn't. Because there would always be someone in the snow, always someone who needed saving, always someone whose life could be changed by one choice, one moment, one person who refused to look away. Thank you, Mara whispered, for not leaving me. Lucien's throat tightened. I could never leave you, not when I could help. The medical team arrived as the sun fully rose. Lucien retreated to the shadows, giving them access to Mara while avoiding their two curious gazes. They stabilized her, praised his medical intervention, and carefully transported her to the hospital where her parents waited. Before they left, Mara called out to him. Lucien? He stepped to the edge of shadow. Yes? Will I see you again? Perhaps, if you need me. I will need you. Everyone needs someone who keeps their promises. And then she was gone. Lucien stood alone in his house, in the silence that had been his companion for 2 centuries. But it felt different now, lighter somehow, as though Mara's simple faith had shifted something fundamental. He walked to Elena's grave that night, as he had every night for 200 years. "I kept my promise," he said to the stone marker. "I'm still here, still helping, still trying to be the man you believed I could be. And tonight I saved a child who reminded me so much of Aurora, who asked me if I was a monster and decided I wasn't, who thanked me for keeping my promises." He knelt beside the grave, his hand resting on the earth. "I miss you, every night, every moment. But you were right, Elena. You were right about everything. There is a reason I'm still here. There are people who need someone to choose mercy. And as long as that's true, I'll keep living. Not because it's easy, not because the grief has lessened, but because you asked, and because every life I save is a testament to what you taught me." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and snow and distant spring. "I love you," Lucian whispered. 200 years gone, and I love you exactly the same, and I'll keep loving you, keep keeping my promise, keep being the man you saw in a monster, for as long as this curse lasts." He stood, preparing to leave. Then he heard it again, crying, faint, distant, but unmistakable. Lucian turned toward the sound, his senses sharpening. Another lost hiker, another person in need, another chance to keep his promise. He looked back at Elena's grave one last time. "Thank you," he said, "for everything, for believing, for loving, for making me promise to survive. I understand now. I finally understand why you were so adamant, why you made me swear, because this," he gestured toward the sound of crying, "this is what love looks like after death. This is how mercy becomes eternal. This is why I'm still here." Then Victor Draculesht, vampire, guardian, the monster who learned to be human, ran toward the sound of someone in need, the way he had for 200 years, the way he would for centuries more, because some promises are kept forever, and some loves never die. They just transform into something stronger, something eternal, something worth surviving for. Subscribe if you believe mercy can resurrect even the damned. Like if you'd choose eternity for love that sees your soul. Comment eternal if you'd survive the night for someone worth dying for.